So a recent news story has caught my attention about TSMC potentially hiring a cargo container from Taiwan to the US with about 5,000 containers. The question is, can TSMC actually move a fab, which is one of the questions being postulated by people who are responding to this news.
What's your minimum specification? If you want an independent cloud services provider for home servers, VPNs, or clients, consider Linode and sign up today at linode.com/TechTechPotato for a free $100 60-day credit. A recent Gartner performance report shows Linode's topology offers almost double the database performance per dollar than other public cloud services.
So this video is going to come in several parts. First, we're going to look at exactly what's being reported. Then we're going to see how feasible it is. And part of this is I've invited a guest on to explain exactly what this means for Taiwan, for TSMC, and relations with China. So first, this news has been reported by Maritime Executive and the Lodestar. They're both quoting United Daily News, a broadsheet newspaper in Taiwan, stating that TSMC is set to hire a container ship filled with 5,000 containers to go from Taiwan to the US for a cost of around $109 million. And the first shipment, whatever that means in this case, is going to happen in October. All the publications involved are equating this requirement for a cargo container, which I should stress hasn't been verified, that it will mean moving equipment from TSMC from Taiwan to the US in preparation for TSMC's Arizona fab. Last year, TSMC announced that it would build a fab in Arizona, initially a 20,000 wafers per month, which is, considering the size of TSMC, who does 1 million wafers per month, really, really tiny. It would be operational by 2024, and it'd be using TSMC's 5nm process, which is an EUV process. Now, in 2024, we expect TSMC to be on the perhaps 2nm process node.
We continue to offer the most advanced logic technology to prove 2D scaling is alive and kicking. When it comes to our most advanced logic technology available, the crown has passed from N7 to N5 and soon to N3. Since N5 went into volume production last year, more than 500,000 wafers has been produced for our customers.
So they're not going to be doing leading edge production at TSMC at Arizona when the fab is operational, but they still need to build it. They recently purchased an 1,100-acre site in north of Phoenix, Arizona, and they're going to start building there. And according to news reports, ground has already been broken. Now, as part of building that fab, they will need to essentially do all of the construction, which takes 12 to 24 months, and then bring in all the equipment and then tune the equipment for the process. That also can take a good 12 months. What the newspapers and the online press are reporting here is that the first shipment will happen in October, which seems really, really early. And there are two main conclusions being drawn by Twitter and the rest of the press that are reporting this right now. One, that TSMC is moving one of its fabs to Arizona. And two, this is because of increased Chinese-Taiwan relations. Now, for this video, I've brought on Sam Reynolds, who is an expert in these matters. He is a friend, and he lives in Taiwan. He has been an analyst for IDC. He has covered the semiconductor space for a long while. He has worked at several companies in the Taiwanese supply chain, and he currently sits as a reporter on GPUs and ASICs in the semi chain as it pertains to the financial markets.
Hey, thanks, Ian. I'm glad to be here. So look, we are recording this at 9 o'clock in the morning, my time on the West Coast on a Sunday, and I care so much about trying to clear up some FUD that I've come on to do this with you. So the assumption, as you said earlier, is that this cargo ship has been chartered to move a fab to the US. And now that is a bit absurd given the complexity of trying to move all this equipment there, right? The key reason, of course, is that the equipment in the fab is not TSMC's. It's made by companies in Europe and the US. There's no doubt that they might have a ship chartered. Of course, right now, with the global COVID pandemic, the market for bulk freight has gone really haywire. And given their scale, they have the means to charter a ship. Now, what are they actually shipping over? Well, that's anyone's guess. What likely is the case is that TSMC relies on thousands of Taiwanese suppliers for equipment that's not so important. It's not lithography, not the big capital items, but the smaller equipment. And what's likely happening is they're using their scale to consolidate all of these purchases, all this equipment, and ship it over to Arizona with one big shipment versus dozens of smaller shipments, which makes total sense, right? I don't doubt that's happening. But the idea that there's a Chinese invasion on the horizon, and as a result, they have to ship over their fab is just absurd, because if that was the case, the global chip shortage would be a massive, massive problem right now. And it is already a problem, but it would create a huge problem of a different scale altogether.
I think TSMC has even said all the manufacturing facilities they have in Taiwan are staying in Taiwan. That was said publicly only a few months ago. So to up wholesale a fab seems a bit manic. I think it's also important to talk about fabs are complex pieces of kit. It sounds overly simplified to say them as a kit. Most people think it's a black box. Money goes in and chip goes out. But you have, your clean room, which is what most people consider, where you're wearing your bunny suit, and that's where the chips are manufactured with the machines. What a lot of people don't realize is that underneath there's what's called the subfab, and that's basically the infrastructure to put together to make sure that the clean room works. We're talking water, we're talking chemicals, we're talking electricity. And, I visited Global Foundries fab. I've got my Global Foundries mug here to show that in Malta. And they were telling me how subfab space is equivalent to clean room space, if not more so, because you've got more to do in the infrastructure. But they also said that's bespoke to each fab. You've got to rely on your local economy, on your local resources. They do custom CAD designs. They even do machine learning optimized designs in the subfab. Now, sure, you can take components, but just to say, let's move this fab up and over, in that context, just makes zero sense.
Well, it's impossible. And secondly, if you look online on their own website, TSMC says that they have the next decade planned out in Taiwan. They're building 3 nanometers, 2 nanometers, right? So if they were going to move, why would they keep on building all these new fabs there?
If you've got an EUV machine, which TSMC 5 nanometer in Arizona is going to have, you're going to be buying that direct from ASML, and they've got facilities across the US and Europe that put those machines together. You're not going to have one that's pre-built in Taiwan, disassemble it, ship it to Arizona and rebuild it there, because those machines also take 6 months to tune. You might as well just buy one of your new ones. I mean, TSMC is buying a lot of those.
Now, let's be clear here. They are building fabs elsewhere around the world, right? So in Japan, they announced one there recently to supply auto, as well as the likes of Sony, Canon, and the entire Japanese sector for lenses, because in every camera, there are chips. And the process node being used by this fab would be appropriate for those chips and also auto too. So they are looking abroad for more factories, but that's simply to be close to market, right? So in the EU, same thing. They've planned factories there to be close to the EU's car sector.
If this chartered ship is going in October, and only over the last, say, 6 months, TSMC has broken ground, why would anybody ship machines ready to go this early in the cycle? I mean, fabs take, 18 to 24 months for ground up to be built? I mean, 12 months if you're double paying and overworking, but let's be honest, this is the US. So the timing is wrong. It doesn't sound right. And TSMC's in expansion mode. So I guess the other side I want to consider is the chances of a Chinese invasion. I mean, you live in Taiwan. I mean, you're currently in Vancouver, spending the summer there. But you live in Taiwan. What's the feeling from your perspective about the threat of China?
For sure, right. So in Taiwan, there are two parties. There's the KMT, which is the Chinese Nationalist Party, and they tend to be more open to working with China, because the idea they work with is that there is one broader Chinese family and Taiwan's part of it. And that's somewhat similar to saying that there's one big Commonwealth family, that the UK, Canada, New Zealand, Australia are part of a broader British civilization. Okay. Now, the party that's actually in power is the DPP, and they are they're more towards having Taiwan as a either de facto independent state or a independent state recognized by the UN. So the current president, Tsai Ing-wen, she is quite pragmatic as far as the cross-strait relations go. So she won't back down from the status quo, which is that Taiwan is already a de facto nation, but not a state. They won't push that red line. So in response, Beijing has, upped the ante with tensions. There are overflights every other day, seems like, by their air force over Taiwan. But at the same time, before COVID, there were still flights of 747s with people in them, businessmen, families, students going across the strait. So while things are tense, and certainly the Hong Kong situation has made things more tense, it's not the brink of war. Secondly, when we think of Taiwan, right, there's actually the main Taiwan islands and the number of islands that are controlled by Taiwan, like Kinmen, which is only a kilometer away from the Chinese mainland, and Penghu, which is about, I think, 100 kilometers roughly away. So they control these because they are of some value in the war, right? The idea is that China would island hop from the mainland to Kinmen to Penghu, and then have a stare down with Taiwan to try and get them to surrender. So if war was imminent, you'd obviously see these two islands being hardened. You'd see civilians being evacuated. You would see difference in what we have right now, right? Right now, aside from COVID, things are quite normal. The threat is not there. There's a great book written by a scholar named Ian Easton. He's with a think tank called 2049. And they managed to obtain, through their contacts in some bureau, a copy of the manual used by the PLA about Taiwan, about the invasion. And allegedly, the manual says that an invasion would be the most costly exercise in the history of modern conflict because of geography, these islands, and also Taiwan's quite mountainous, and because also they are well aware that should they invade, they would be sanctioned by the world. So any Chinese bank would become worthless. And secondly, there's also the chance of a counterstrike by Japan and, of course, the US. So despite the fact that the US and Taiwan aren't, recognized as countries, they're not, official relations, they still are allies. And what governs this is the Taiwan Relations Act. The Taiwan Relations Act says that in the event of an invasion by China, the US is legally obliged to assist Taiwan in its defense. And this gets passed every year by both parties. Congress is divided on some things, but in this they are, united. And Beijing knows this. They know that should they invade Taiwan wholesale, right, that would trigger a response by the US and likely Japan. So the idea of a war with Taiwan is not going to be dismissed by any means, but happening the next year or two, very unlikely, if not impossible. So that analysis as an impetus for TSMC to move away from Taiwan, to move its fab, right, is just absurd.
So you expect if there were to be any conflict, it would be a gradual escalation, not like because of the difficulty of engaging in conflict in the region?
Definitely. The chance of an out-and-out war is, I think, near zero. What might happen is they will just fund China-friendly candidates to come in and have a carrot and stick. When the economy goes sour, as it might eventually in Taiwan, they will say, look, we have this idea of free trade with China and Taiwan. We have the idea of investment from China. Let's open up to China, right? And we'll become prosperous together. So I think that's more powerful than the idea of a war. So in Taiwan, in Kaohsiung, they had a mayor that was taking donations during his campaign from China. And he was very open as part of the KMT to further cross-strait trade. And so that is what will happen in Taiwan potentially, right? You'll have politics play out in one way, and you'll have candidates come in who are China friendly, and they'll ease together over decades. Not happening now, but that's one pathway.
I think it's important to note that because Taiwan has been so centralized in the semiconductor trade, especially, if there were a conflict to happen, everybody would be affected. There wouldn't be one country in the world that wouldn't be affected by it. And it would draw everybody in. It would not be an isolated incident. And as you said, with the US agreement, and I believe the US consistently sells weapons and machinery to Taiwan for the act of defense as well. So that, I think, is with regards to just extrapolating that from this one container ship going from Taiwan to the US is a bit excessive. I mean, honestly, I think one way to think about this is if Taiwan is moving some components out from their local suppliers just because they don't have the infrastructure already in Arizona, which is what we think this is, what essentially we think this is. If TSMC is building capacity outside of the country over the next 10, 20 years, reducing our reliance on Taiwan, then that's obviously a different angle in the China-Taiwan discussion, which is not meant to be what this video is about at all. But it just seems to have taken a turn that way. So let's go back to the original premise. Is Taiwan chartering a cargo ship to the US? We asked TSMC literally an hour ago before we're recording this, and the response we got back was the words, no comment. So technically a comment, but a no comment. They're not going to talk about it. I mean, I've been dealing with TSMC for a while. I know you have as well. Mm-hmm. And that seems to be their favorite phrase. Regardless of anything you ask them, no comment.
I think one idea could be that TSMC says no comment so often because they are largely agnostic to who they work with, right? So they work with virtually every company out there in the tech space. And that requires neutrality. So they won't ever comment on their customers' ambitions. So for instance, when Huawei was sanctioned by the US during the Trump era, TSMC could no longer make chips for them. And the response from them I got in that was, again, no comment, and also no comment, but we can't comment on our customers' situations because they are agnostic to everything. And so they're going to say about this no comment because if this was true, right, as some have said on Twitter, it would be a massive market movement event that would disrupt, as you said earlier, virtually every country and every company in the world, right? If it's not true, it's also not worth talking about either. It's FUD, right? So again, no comment.
Yeah, which is also why we're talking about it. I think one of the publications that are reporting this said that the cost was 109 million, 106 million to charter a cargo ship. Seems like a lot. I mean, I've put a note in the comments for our discussion here. I think that is worthwhile looking at. If TSMC were to upheave a fab, even though we've explained how impossible that is, put everything onto one container ship and send it across, if China was going to be that aggressive to Taiwan, they would just blow the ship right out the ocean.
Right, they would.
Because let's say you had an EUV machine in there, or several, hundreds of other equipments worth several million each. So you've got this cargo ship with upwards of $2 to $3 billion of cargo suddenly finds itself at the bottom of the Pacific. That's going to cause not only issues politically, but also in the semiconductor chain. And it's immeasurable almost, at least in a 25-minute video, immeasurable.
It certainly is. But the other thing is, I mentioned earlier that the majority of the components of importance at TSMC, like the EUV machines, are made by American and EU-based firms. The reason why China cannot make chips at the same process node as TSMC is because their equivalents were sanctioned. So SMIC, which is a fab in China, they could not procure the same machines from ASML in the EU and in Holland because of sanctions. So if they really wanted to, why not just steal them? Why not just get the ship and intercept it and bring it back to port in China?
Pirates. Yeah, there
Right.
is that. I will say that you can move an EUV machine. I've seen it done. Oh, well, I haven't seen it done. When I was at Global Foundries, that was before they had announced coming out of 7 nanometer. So they had one they had one EUV machine installed, and that was currently being tuned in that sort of 6-month tuning period. And they had another one on the floor in bits, essentially. But of course, they sold those because they stopped doing progress towards 7 nanometer. So you can technically move an EUV machine, but TSMC buys so many. Why would you?
Exactly. Why not have it shipped directly from the manufacturer, the factory? But it's important to correct the record here and to make sure people know that this is not happening, because the entire source for this was based on a local Taiwanese report in the media. And having lived in Taiwan for a long time, I know that the Taiwanese media is not reliable and they will run everything and anything. So the source itself is not legit and the analysis is absurd.
The source is UDN, United Daily News Taiwan. What's your opinion of UDN?
In the Taiwan media sector, innuendo is fact, right? They will run any kind of market rumor as fact. So Digitimes, which is a publication, I won't call it a rag, but some might call it that, from Taiwan, that will run any kind of rumor about supply chain as the word of God. And unfortunately, a certain brand of tech media will source Digitimes, aka Dodgy Times, as straight from the factory. So the media scene in Taiwan is not great. Tabloids, fear mongering, innuendo is common, and UDN is a daily broadsheet in Taiwan. Right, they're probably at the top of the tier of reliability, but at the same time, they get things wrong, and so to base an entire analysis on one report, I don't know.
I have heard that some of these publications will publish a story based on overheard in the bathroom.
Yes. Over in Shinju, they'll go to the cafes and just listen in for people talking. Said, "Oh, I heard it in Shinju. It must be true." For those that don't know, Shinju is where TSMC and the entire supply chain is pretty much focused on in Taiwan. It's a city.
Many thanks to Sam for coming on the channel and sharing with us his expertise. It's interesting to hear what exactly is going on in Taiwan, because we don't necessarily actively read much about it here in the West. Please let me know your thoughts about the whole situation. Is this news? Is hiring a shipping container news? It's not even been verified. So is it worth talking about? And then, on the more global aspect, what about moving more of the semiconductor manufacturing outside of Taiwan? How much is that going to affect everybody on a more global scale? If you like this content, please don't forget to like and subscribe. We also have now a private Discord server. And if you want access to that, become a Patreon member and it'll instantly add you as long as your emails are linked. You can join the Patreon for as little as $1.50 a month, and it all goes back into helping the channel. Thank you for your support.